My son slammed his whiskey glass down and roared with fury. "That's enough, Mother. Get your things and leave. Nobody wants you in this house." Then my husband slowly rose from his chair, looked at our son with eyes full of pain. What happened next, no one could have anticipated. My son hurled his crystal glass straight to the floor. The explosion made everyone flinch except me. I'd been waiting 4 years for him to snap like this. Watching the amber liquid spread across my Persian rug, all I felt was icy certainty. "Pack your bags, Mom. You're not welcome here anymore." His voice was so sharp it stung my ears. 15 people sat frozen around our 40th anniversary dinner, silverware suspended midair, staring at my son like they were witnessing a stranger's breakdown. In a way, they were. I'd known his true nature for 4 years. They were discovering it tonight. I kept my hands folded calmly in my lap and met his gaze without blinking. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't respond. I simply observed him the way you watch someone having a public meltdown, with detached curiosity and mild sympathy. That seemed to enrage him further. My husband's knuckles turned white, gripping his knife. I thought it might break. Across the table, my daughter-in-law stared at her plate, face crimson with humiliation. My sister squeezed my wrist under the table 3 times. Our code. I gave one slight nod. Yes, tonight. We execute the plan tonight. My son was now pacing behind his chair, designer suit rumpled, silk tie loosened. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd been drinking since 3 in the afternoon and arrived 90 minutes late to his own parents' celebration. The luxury watch gleaming on his wrist caught the candlelight. I knew precisely where the money came from to purchase that timepiece. He'd embezzled it from us. "Sit down," I said quietly. "You're creating a spectacle." He laughed, but it sounded off. Too brittle, too defensive. "I'm creating a spectacle? You've been questioning every decision I make at the firm for months. Appearing at the office unannounced, inquiring about accounts that don't concern you, acting like you understand anything about managing a corporation." I let him continue. I'd learned something crucial over these past 4 years. Guilty people always talk too much when they're trapped. They can't stop themselves. Our colleague Richard shifted uncomfortably. His wife whispered something urgent to him. Everyone could sense something was profoundly wrong, but they didn't comprehend what yet. My son kept escalating, getting louder. "You spend all this money on expensive dinners and luxury restaurants when the firm is barely surviving. Do you even consider that? Do you care?" The firm was only struggling because he'd been stealing from it. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my water glass and took a deliberate sip before setting it down carefully. "Actually, I wanted to discuss the firm with you. I was examining the discretionary accounts last week and discovered some fascinating irregularities." His expression changed for just an instant, maybe half a second. Raw panic flashed across his features before he masked it with anger. But I caught it. I'd been watching for exactly that reaction. "Fascinating irregularities," he scoffed, attempting to laugh it off. "Mother, you couldn't identify embezzlement if it introduced itself personally. Those accounts are complex. They involve consulting contracts and equipment acquisitions that someone with actual business experience would need to interpret." "Consulting contracts," I repeated, keeping my tone light and conversational, as if discussing the weather. Yes, I noticed several of those payments to firms I'd never encountered before. I attempted to research them online, but I couldn't locate any websites or business registrations. "Isn't that peculiar?" The color drained from his face. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Then he recovered and forced out another laugh that sounded like something shattering. "This is absurd. I don't need to explain fundamental business operations to someone who's never held a legitimate job in her entire existence." That's when he grabbed his whiskey glass and smashed it down so violently it shattered in his hand. He didn't even notice he was bleeding as he pointed at me with a trembling, blood-covered finger. "Pack your bags. Leave. Nobody wants you here." Complete silence. Even the restaurant sounds from the kitchen seemed to cease. I watched a drop of his blood hit the white tablecloth and bloom into a dark stain. My heartbeat was steady. I'd imagined this precise moment so many times, lying awake at night beside my sleeping husband, that it almost felt like I was watching it unfold to someone else. My husband stood up, not quickly, not dramatically. He just rose from his chair with a kind of slow, purposeful movement that commands attention. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a thick manila envelope I hadn't noticed him bring. 3 inches of documents at least. He placed it on the table in front of our son with a soft thud that somehow felt louder than all the shouting. "Open it," my husband said. 2 words, nothing more. But his voice carried such weight that every person at that table went absolutely still. My daughter-in-law started crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she finally looked up from the plate where she'd been hiding. My son's hand was still bleeding as he reached for the envelope. His fingers were shaking so badly he could barely grasp it. He opened it and looked at the first page. I watched his expression transform. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like terror. He started flipping through the pages faster and faster, his breathing becoming rapid. I leaned forward slightly. When I spoke, my voice was calm and clear enough for everyone to hear. For years. I've been documenting everything for 4 years. My son stared at the spreadsheet before him, his bleeding hand leaving crimson fingerprints on the white paper. But I was no longer in that restaurant. In my mind, I was back 4 years ago, standing outside his office door on a Wednesday afternoon in May, holding a container of my husband's favorite stew that I'd prepared that morning. That was the day everything shifted. I hadn't planned to visit the office that day. My husband mentioned he was feeling unwell, so I decided to bring him lunch as a surprise. The receptionist informed me he was in a conference, so I thought I'd leave the stew on his desk with a note. Walking toward his office, I passed our son's door. It was slightly ajar, and I heard his voice. He was supposed to be in Boston meeting with a potential investor. That's what he told us at Sunday brunch 3 days earlier. I stopped. I shouldn't have listened, but something in his tone made me pause. He sounded stressed in a way I'd never heard before. "You need to have this covered by Friday," another man's voice said through the speakerphone. "The casino doesn't accept excuses, and you're already 4 weeks behind on payments." My grip tightened on the stew container. Casino. My son didn't gamble. He'd always claimed gambling was for people who didn't understand probability. "I'll get it," my son replied, and his voice was almost begging. "I just need to transfer some funds from the discretionary accounts." My parents never scrutinized those closely. They're too preoccupied pretending to understand the business to actually examine the numbers. My parents. He said it with such contempt, such absolute certainty that we were too foolish to notice anything. I stood there in the corridor, stew growing cold in my hands, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger yet. Something colder than anger. Something patient. I didn't enter his office. I didn't leave the stew for my husband. I walked back to my car, drove home, and sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours staring at nothing. Then I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar, "How to detect corporate embezzlement." The next 4 months became my education. I learned about forensic accounting from free online courses. I watched YouTube videos about tracking fraudulent transactions. I read articles about patterns of workplace theft and how gambling addiction fuels financial crimes. Every afternoon while my husband was at work and my son thought I was at my bridge club or charity committee meetings, I was teaching myself how to catch him. Finding the first fraudulent transaction took me 8 weeks. I had to request access to the firm accounts, which meant explaining to my husband that I wanted to understand the business better. He thought it was endearing that I was taking an interest after all these years. He gave me all the passwords without hesitation. The transaction was buried in a quarterly report under consulting contracts. $23,000 paid to something called Meridian Strategic Consulting. I searched for that company everywhere. State business registries, Google, LinkedIn, industry databases. It didn't exist. The check had been deposited into an account I eventually traced back to my son. I printed out the transaction record and filed it in a folder I kept hidden in the back of my closet. Then I kept searching. By the end of the first 2 months, I had found 6 more fraudulent consulting fees totaling $87,000. Each discovery felt like a small, grim victory. My son had underestimated me so completely that he hadn't even attempted to hide his tracks well. He truly believed his mother was too naive to notice. Sunday brunches became performances. I would sit across from him and compliment his new watch, inquire about his expensive vacation, admire the custom suit he wore. He would smile and accept my praise, never knowing that I had tracked precisely how much he stole to pay for each item. Once I asked him directly about his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost at least $20,000. He told me he'd received a performance bonus. I knew for certain no bonuses had been issued that quarter. I smiled and said how proud I was of him. 5 months into my investigation, my husband found me in my home office at midnight on a Thursday night. The desk was covered in spreadsheets, bank statements, and printed transaction records. I had been so absorbed in tracking a series of fake equipment purchases that I hadn't heard him come in. "What is all this?" he asked. I looked up at him, and in that moment I made a choice. I couldn't carry this alone anymore. "Close the door," I said, "and sit down." I showed him everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every fake company, every forged signature I had found. I watched my husband's face go through shock, disbelief, and finally a kind of broken acceptance that made my heart ache. This was our son, the boy he had taught to play baseball, the young man he had proudly given a position in the family firm, and he was stealing from us. "We confront him tomorrow," my husband said, his voice shaking. "We stop this right now." "No." My voice came out harder than I intended. "We don't." He stared at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. But I knew with absolute certainty what needed to happen next. I need more evidence. I need a pattern so clear that no lawyer could explain it away as mistakes or misunderstandings. More than that, I need to see how far our son will go. I need to understand who he has really become before I destroy him. It took me until 4 in the morning to convince my husband to trust me, to wait, to watch, to document everything while our son continued stealing from us. My husband struggled with it every day after that, but he followed my plan. Over the next 3 years, the amounts grew larger. $28,000, $42,000, one transfer of $65,000 that my son coded as emergency facility repairs that never happened. Each theft was another page in the folder, another nail in the coffin I was building for him. Each stolen dollar became another piece of evidence, another line in the spreadsheets I updated every week. But 8 months ago, something happened that I hadn't planned for. Something that made me realize my son's crimes went far deeper than stealing money from his parents. My daughter-in-law showed up at my house on a Friday morning without calling first. I opened the door and saw her standing there with her purse clutched against her chest, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. I need to talk to you." I brought her into my kitchen and made tea, the same thing I had done when she was dating my son, and would come over nervous about meeting the family. Back then, she had been bright and ambitious, a young woman with a psychology degree and plans to open her own therapy practice. Now she looked like someone who had been carrying a terrible weight for too long. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, and then she started crying so hard she could barely breathe. I moved my chair next to hers and put my arm around her shoulders, letting her sob into my sweater. When she finally calmed down enough to talk, the story came out in pieces. Their savings account was empty. Every credit card was maxed out. She had discovered a second mortgage on their house 3 weeks ago, and the signature on the paperwork was supposedly hers, but she had never signed anything. The handwriting looked close enough that the bank had accepted it, but she knew she had never seen those documents before. "He forged my signature," she said, staring at her hands. I confronted him about it, and he told me I must have forgotten signing it. He said I was losing my memory, that I needed to see a doctor. He made me feel insane. I already knew about the second mortgage. I had found it in my research 4 months earlier. I knew about the Max credit cards too. What I hadn't known was that my son was making his wife doubt her own sanity. "How much debt are you in?" I asked gently. She looked up at me with eyes full of shame. I think maybe 250,000, but I'm not sure. He won't show me the full picture. He says it's his job to handle the finances, and I should focus on taking care of the children. 250,000 that she knew about. The amount he had stolen from the firm was probably more than that by now. My son was drowning in gambling debt and dragging his wife down with him. I want to leave him, she whispered, but I have no money, no savings. Our house is mortgaged twice over, and if I try to divorce him, he'll fight me for custody of the kids. He's already said that if I ever try to leave, he'll make sure I never see them again. He said no judge would give custody to a woman with no income and no place to live. I looked at this young woman who had married my son 9 years ago, who had given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, who had slowly been isolated and controlled and threatened into silence. And I made a decision that would change both of our lives. I need to show you something, I said. I went to my closet and pulled out the folder I had been keeping for almost 4 years. It was thick now, bursting with documents and printouts and bank statements. I brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table between us. "What is this?" she asked. "This is evidence that your husband has been stealing from the family business for 4 years. Embezzlement. Fraud. Forged signatures on company documents." I opened the folder and showed her the first spreadsheet. "This is $312,000 he has stolen from us so far. I've been documenting everything." Her face went completely white. She stared at the papers like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You knew." Her voice was strange, flat. "You've known for 4 years that he was stealing, and you didn't stop him." "I was building a case," I said calmly. "I needed enough evidence that no lawyer could explain it away. I needed a pattern that would result in real consequences." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers touching the edge of the spreadsheet. "What kind of consequences?" "Prison," I said. "Federal charges for embezzlement over a certain amount carries serious time. And if he forged your signature on that mortgage, that's bank fraud. That's another federal charge." I watched her process this information. Shock gave way to something else. Something harder. Something that looked almost like hope. "Can you help me?" she asked. "Can you help me get my kids away from him safely?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "I already have a plan," I said. "And you're part of it now." Over the next 8 months, my daughter-in-law and I became partners in a mission neither of us had asked for. I connected her with Patricia Reynolds, one of the best divorce attorneys in the state, and paid for the consultations with money from an account my son didn't know I had. We met in coffee shops across town, places where no one from our neighborhood would recognize us. Patricia was in her 50s, sharp and efficient, and she understood immediately what we were dealing with. Financial abuse. Forged documents. Threats regarding custody, she said, making notes. "We can build a strong case, but timing is everything. When do you want to file?" "The same day we file criminal charges," I told Patricia, watching my daughter-in-law's face as she absorbed the timeline. "Everything happens at once." Now, sitting at this anniversary dinner table, watching my son flip through that folder with trembling hands, I could see that moment arriving exactly as I had planned it. His face had gone from pale to ashen, and his bleeding hand left smudges of red across the white pages. Each document he touched was another piece of the trap closing around him. The first page was a master spreadsheet listing every fraudulent transaction over 4 years. Dates, amounts, account numbers, the fake company names he had invented. Meridian Strategic Consulting, Summit Equipment Solutions, Apex Facility Services. None of them real. All of them ways to funnel our money into his gambling debts. My son looked up from the folder with wild eyes. "Dad, I can explain this. There are legitimate reasons for all of these." "Keep reading," my husband said quietly. His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath it. My son flipped to the next section. Bank statements showing deposits into his personal accounts that matched perfectly with the amount stolen from the firm. Then photographs printed in color. Him walking into the Bellagio Casino in Las Vegas on a Tuesday afternoon in June when he had told us he was visiting a potential client in San Francisco. Him at a poker table, a stack of chips in front of him. The timestamp on the photo showed 2:30 in the afternoon on a workday. Around the table, our dinner guests had gone completely silent. Richard had set down his fork and was staring at my son with an expression of growing horror. His wife had her hand over her mouth. My sister sat perfectly still beside me, her hand still resting on my wrist under the table. She had been there for so many of the meetings with Patricia, had witnessed my daughter-in-law's tearful confessions, had helped me organize documents when the evidence became overwhelming. "Where did you get these?" my son asked, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Does it matter?" I asked. My voice came out colder than I expected. "The question isn't where we got the evidence. The question is why you thought you would never be caught." He stared at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. Good. I wanted him to see exactly how much he had underestimated me. My husband reached across the table and turned to a page near the back of the folder. "This morning, we filed federal charges against you. Embezzlement exceeding $300,000. Wire fraud for the electronic transfers. Bank fraud for forging your wife's signature on mortgage documents we know she never signed." The restaurant seemed to tilt. I heard someone gasp, though I couldn't tell who. My son's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You forged Nicole's signature?" Richard's wife asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Where is Nicole?" my son managed to say, looking around the table as if just realizing his wife wasn't there. She had been sitting beside him during the first part of dinner, silent and tense. She had excused herself before dessert, saying she needed to check on the children with the babysitter. He had barely noticed her leave. "Nicole is safe," I said. "She and the children are somewhere you won't find them. Tomorrow morning, she'll file for divorce. Full custody, sole access to any remaining assets, and a restraining order preventing you from contacting her or the children except through supervised visits once you're released from prison." The word prison seemed to hit him physically. He actually flinched. "Mom, please." His voice turned pleading. "I can pay it all back. I can fix this. Just give me a chance to make this right." "You had 4 years of chances," I said. "Every Sunday brunch when you sat across from me and lied about where you were, what you were doing, how the business was going. Every time you mocked my intelligence or dismissed my questions. Every time you made your wife feel insane for noticing that money was disappearing. Those were all chances to stop, to get help, to be honest. You chose not to take any of them." My husband pulled out another document from near the back of the folder. "This is a notarized statement from your wife detailing the financial abuse, the threats you made regarding custody, the isolation tactics you used to control her. She has text messages, recorded phone calls, and testimony from her therapist about the psychological damage you caused." "You turned my own wife against me?" my son asked, looking at me with something close to hatred. "I gave your wife the resources to save herself and her children from you," I corrected. "That's not the same thing." My sister spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been a witness to much of the evidence gathering. I'll testify in court if needed about what I've seen and heard." My son looked around the table at faces that had been friendly and familiar an hour ago. Now they looked at him with disgust, shock, and betrayal. He tried to stand up, pushing his chair back, so hard it almost fell over. My husband's hand came down on his shoulder, pressing him back into his seat with surprising strength. "You're not going anywhere," my husband said. "The police are waiting outside this restaurant. You're going exactly where you should have gone 4 years ago, to face the consequences of your choices." My husband's hand remained firmly on our son's shoulder, holding him in place, as if he might try to run. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the restaurant door opened, and 2 police officers walked toward our table with the calm, measured steps of people who had done this many times before. My son saw them coming. His eyes went wide, and I watched all the color drain from his face until he looked almost gray in the candlelight. He tried to stand again, but my husband's grip tightened. The officers reached our table and stood on either side of my son's chair. One of them was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. The other was younger, a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Are you Daniel James Henderson?" the older officer asked. My son couldn't seem to find his voice. He just nodded, a small jerky movement that made him look like a child caught doing something wrong. "We need you to stand up, sir," the female officer said. Her voice was professional but not unkind. Richard half rose from his seat across the table. "Wait, what is this about? There must be some mistake." He looked at my husband with confusion and growing alarm. "Tom, what's happening here?" My husband's voice was steady when he answered, though I could hear the exhaustion in it. "Our son has been embezzling from the family business for over 4 years. We filed federal charges this morning." The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His wife put her hand on his arm, her face pale with shock. Around the table, I could see the same expression repeated on every face. Disbelief, horror, the sudden realization that the successful young businessman they thought they knew was actually a criminal. My son stood up slowly as the officers guided him. The older officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and I heard someone at the table make a small sound of distress. Might have been Richard's wife. Might have been someone else. I kept my eyes on my son's face. "Daniel James Henderson, you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and bank fraud," the officer said and began reading him his rights. The words were familiar from 1,000 television shows, but hearing them spoken over my own son made them sound strange and unreal. The handcuffs clicked into place. That sound seemed louder than it should have been. Final. Irreversible. My son turned to look at me, and for the first time since this dinner began, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger anymore. Not indignation. Just pure, desperate fear. "Mom, please," he said, and his voice broke. "Please don't do this. I can pay everything back. Every penny. Just give me a chance. Please." I looked at my son standing there in his expensive suit with his hands cuffed behind his back, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant sadness for what he could have been if he had made different choices. "You told me to pack my bags," I said, and my voice came out flat and emotionless. "You said nobody wanted me at this table. You were wrong on both counts. I'm not going anywhere. And everyone here now knows exactly who you are." The officers began walking my son toward the restaurant exit. He twisted around to look back at the table, at the people who had been laughing and talking with him just 2 hours ago. Now they watched him being led away in handcuffs. And I could see in their faces that they would never look at him the same way again. His expensive suit and designer shoes looked ridiculous now, like a costume that no longer fit the person wearing it. When the restaurant door closed behind him, the silence at our table was absolute. Nobody seemed to know what to say or where to look. I picked up my water glass and took a sip, my hands completely steady. My sister was the first to speak. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "What's the legal process?" I was grateful for the question. It gave me something concrete to focus on instead of the strange, empty feeling that was starting to creep into my chest now that it was done. "Arraignment will be Monday morning," I said. "They'll set bail, but our attorney thinks it will be denied. The amount stolen is substantial and there's flight risk given the severity of the charges. After that, it moves to trial. Everything will come out. The gambling addiction, the fake companies, every fraudulent transaction." My husband added, "We also contacted the IRS yesterday. He never reported any of the stolen money as income. That opens up additional charges for tax evasion." Richard leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. "Tom, Ellen, I have to ask, if you knew about this 4 years ago, why did you wait so long? Why not stop him sooner?" It was a fair question. I had been expecting someone to ask it eventually, because I wanted to see how far he would go, I said, and heard how cold my voice sounded. I wanted evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away as accounting errors or misunderstandings. I wanted a pattern so clear that no lawyer could argue it was anything but deliberate theft. I paused, looking down at my folded hands. And because I wanted to understand exactly who my son had become before I destroyed the life he built on lies and stolen money. The table fell silent again. I could feel people processing what I had just said. The calculated nature of it. The patience required to watch someone you love commit crimes for 4 years without stopping them. Some of them probably thought I was cruel. Maybe I was. Then I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Nicole walking toward our table.
My daughter-in-law, my partner in all of this.
She had been waiting in the back section of the restaurant with the children at a separate table, far enough away that they wouldn't witness their father's arrest. She came straight to me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. Her embrace was tight and desperate, and I felt her whole body shaking as she whispered, "Thank you," against my shoulder. I held her carefully, aware that everyone at the table was watching us, trying to piece together what role this young woman had played in the evening's events. When Nicole finally pulled back, her face was wet with tears. But there was something different in her expression now. Not just relief. Something stronger. She looked like someone who had finally stopped carrying a weight that had been crushing her for years. "Where are the kids?" I asked quietly. "With my mom," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She picked them up from the back table 15 minutes ago.
I didn't want them to see any of this.
I told them their dad had to leave early for work.
They believed me.
They always believe me when I make excuses for him. The bitterness in her voice made my chest ache. How many times had this young woman covered for my son? How many lies had she told to protect him, to keep the family looking normal from the outside? 4 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched those lies get exposed one by one. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had imagined something grand and imposing like in movies, but it was just a plain room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable wooden benches. My husband sat beside me in the gallery, his hand resting on mine. Nicole sat on my other side, her posture rigid with tension. My sister had come too, sitting directly behind us, a quiet presence of support. My son sat at the defense table in a suit that looked too big for him now. He had lost weight during the 4 months in jail waiting for trial. Bail had been denied, just as our attorney predicted. The prosecution had argued that someone who had stolen over $300,000 and had gambling debts was a significant flight risk. The judge agreed. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Rachel Martinez. She was thorough and precise, walking the jury through every fraudulent transaction with the same spreadsheets I had created 4 years ago. Bank statements were projected on a large screen for everyone to see, each theft highlighted in red. The fake company names looked even more ridiculous, displayed 20 times larger than life. Meridian Strategic Consulting, Summit Equipment Solutions, companies that had never existed anywhere except in my son's imagination and on forged invoices. When my husband was called to testify, I watched him walk to the stand with slow, measured steps. He looked older than he had 4 months ago. This whole process had aged both of us in ways that had nothing to do with time. The prosecutor asked him to describe what the family business meant to him. My husband's voice was steady as he explained that his father had started the company in 1972 with a small loan and a lot of determination, that he had worked there since he was 17 years old, that he had always dreamed of passing it on to his son someday. "And when did you discover that your son was stealing from the company?" Rachel asked. "My wife discovered it first," my husband said. "She came to me about 5 months into her investigation and showed me what she had found. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought there had to be some mistake." His voice cracked slightly on the word mistake, and he paused to clear his throat. But the evidence was undeniable. My son was systematically stealing from the business my father built. The defense attorney, an expensive-looking man in his 50s with silver hair, tried to suggest that the so-called theft was really just aggressive business decisions that my husband and I, as older individuals not familiar with modern practices, had misunderstood. My husband shut that down immediately. "I've been running this company for 42 years, he said, his voice hard. "I understand the difference between a legitimate business expense and money being funneled into fake companies so my son can pay gambling debts." When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand feeling strangely calm. I had been preparing for this moment for 4 years. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and then I sat down and looked directly at the jury. Rachel asked me to describe how I first discovered my son was stealing. I told them about the Wednesday afternoon I brought Stu to my husband's office, about overhearing the phone call, about the contempt in my son's voice when he said his parents never checked the accounts closely. "What did you do after you overheard that conversation?" she asked. "I went home and started researching forensic accounting," I said. "I taught myself how to track financial irregularities. Then I began documenting every fraudulent transaction I could find." "Why didn't you confront your son immediately?" I looked at my son sitting at the defense table. He was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my eyes. Because I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. And I wanted to understand who he had truly become. The courtroom was completely silent. I could feel the jury members leaning forward, riveted. The defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive during cross-examination. He suggested that a real mother would have tried to help her son instead of building a case against him. "I did help my son," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "I helped him face consequences he would never have faced if I had enabled his crimes to continue. I helped my grandchildren escape growing up with a father who would have taught them that theft and lies are acceptable. And I helped my daughter-in-law leave an abusive marriage before it destroyed her completely." The defense attorney had no response to that. He sat down, and I saw something in the jury's faces that told me they understood. They weren't looking at a vindictive mother. They were looking at a woman who had made the hardest choice of her life to protect the people she loved. The verdict came back after only 5 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. My son kept his eyes down as the jury foreman read each charge. Embezzlement, wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion.
Guilty. 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 Guilty.
The judge was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked at my son over her reading glasses and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the silent courtroom. "Mr. Henderson, you stole from your family business. You abused your wife financially and emotionally. You forged documents without remorse. You showed no regard for the people who loved you and trusted you." She paused, and in that pause, I held my breath. "But perhaps your greatest crime was underestimating your mother's intelligence and resolve. The sentence is 10 years in federal prison." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo forever. I felt my husband's hand tighten around mine. Nicole let out a sob beside me that might have been relief or grief or both. My sister touched my shoulder from behind, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not happiness. But closure. The kind of closure that comes when you finish something difficult and necessary and irreversible. 8 months after the trial, I stood in my garden on a warm Sunday afternoon in late October and watched my grandchildren play in the yard. The older one, Christopher, was 9 now. He was pushing his little sister, Emma, on the swing set my husband had installed 2 months ago. Their laughter carried across the lawn, clear and untroubled in a way it hadn't been when their father lived with them. Nicole sat beside me on the patio, sipping coffee and showing me sketches on her tablet. She was starting a small counseling practice specializing in financial abuse recovery. I was helping her with the startup costs, money that came from accounts my son had never known existed. "I got the lease approved for the office space on Harbor Street," she said, and there was excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. "Small but perfect for starting out. 3 consultation rooms and a waiting area. When do you open?" I asked. "February, if everything goes according to plan. I already have 8 clients lined up through referrals from the Women's Center." She looked down at her tablet, then back at me. "I changed my name legally last month. Back to Nicole Anderson. The kids are keeping Henderson for now, but when they're older, they can decide if they want to change it." The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. Full custody to Nicole with supervised visits only after my son's release from prison in 10 years. The house had been sold to pay off the fraudulent second mortgage and the gambling debts. Nicole and the children now lived in a smaller place closer to my house, closer to safety and support, and the family that actually wanted to protect them. The family business was thriving in ways it hadn't in years. My husband had promoted for long-time employees who had been overlooked when our son held his vice president position. The company culture had improved almost immediately. People smiled more. Meetings were productive instead of tense. And profits were actually higher without the constant drain of embezzled funds disappearing into casino cages. I had taken a more active role myself. My 4 years of studying forensic accounting had translated into a permanent position as financial oversight officer. I reviewed every account, every transaction, every vendor relationship. No one would steal from this company again. Not on my watch. Mom, watch this. Christopher called from the swing set. He was showing Emma how to pump her legs to go higher. Patient and encouraging. So different from the anxious, secretive child he had been a year ago. Nicole had gotten him into therapy immediately after the separation. The therapist said Christopher had been covering for his father's absences and erratic behavior for over a year, lying to teachers and friends to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. Slowly, carefully, he was learning that honesty was safer than lies. That telling the truth wouldn't result in punishment or chaos. Emma, only 6, had suffered in different ways. Nightmares, anxiety about loud noises. But she slept peacefully now in her new bedroom with a nightlight shaped like a star. Nicole said she hadn't had a nightmare in 3 months. I watched them play and felt something settle in my chest. This was why I had spent 4 years documenting instead of confronting. This safety, this peace, this chance for them to have childhoods not shaped by their father's lies and violence. My sister arrived with an apple pie still warm from her oven, and we sat together on the patio, watching the children play, watching Nicole smile, watching the afternoon sun paint everything gold. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could finally breathe.